I have worn this uniform for 19 years. In 19 years, you learn to stand still. You learn to let your face go quiet like still water. You learn that the world can burn in front of you and your job is to not blink. I have stood through rain that soaked me to the bone. I have stood through a summer so hot the road went soft under my boots. I have stood while a woman screamed at me 2 inches from my ear, trying to make me laugh, and I did not laugh. But I want to tell you about the one day I almost broke. It was the last morning of autumn in Renholt. You do not know Renholt, most of you. It is a small kingdom, older than it looks on the maps. We have a river and a gray palace and a lot of pride. The kind of pride that is heavy to carry. That morning the sky was the color of old iron and the wind came off the river smelling of wet stone. The courtyard in front of the Renholt Palace was full by 9. Tourists mostly. They had cameras. They had children on their shoulders. There was a girl, maybe 6, in a bright yellow coat, and she stood right at the rope holding a little paper flag, and every time a horse came near she squealed. Her mother kept telling her to hush. She never hushed. I remember that yellow coat more than I remember some faces I have known for years. There were reporters too, more than usual. They had come for the ceremony. You see, that day the kingdom was going to honor a man. His name was Lord Everett Vane. Let me tell you about Lord Everett because you have to understand him to understand what happened. Lord Everett was the son of our queen consort, Queen Sabine. She had married our king, King Rowan, some 7 years before, and she brought Everett with her from her first marriage. So Everett was not a prince by blood, but he had a prince's smile. He had that thing some men are born with, where a room turns to look at them without being told to. He was tall. He wore his coat like it had been sewn onto him, and a year before this morning he had become a hero. Here is the story everyone believed. The autumn before, the young prince, Prince Aldous, King Rowan's own son, a boy of 8, had gone down to the river with his tutor and a small party. It was a still day. The prince wandered too close to the old stone weir, where the water runs fast and dark and pulls at your ankles like hands. He slipped. He went under. And the story went that Lord Everett, without a thought for himself, threw off his coat and went into that black water and pulled the boy out, saved the future of the kingdom, carried the child up the bank, both of them shaking, and did not let go until the prince was breathing. The kingdom loved him for it. How could they not? The queen consort's son, not even royal by blood, risking his life for the king's boy. It was the kind of story people want to be true. It made everything feel like it fit together. So that gray morning they were going to give him a medal, the Star of Renholt, the oldest honor we have, in front of the whole court, in front of the cameras, in front of that little girl in the yellow coat. And I was there because I was on duty. I stood at the north pillar of the ceremonial dais, the one closest to the palace steps. That was my post. From there I could see everything, the dais, the crowd, the line of guards, the great doors where the royal family would come out. And I could see the boy. Not Everett, the other boy, the young one whose post was next to mine. His name was Private Callum Reed. Reed was new, 9 months in the guard, maybe less. 19 years old, same as the years I had served, which I remember thinking was a strange thing. He had a plain, honest face, the kind that does not hide anything well. That is a hard thing for a guardsman. We are supposed to be blank. Reed had not learned it yet. When he was cold, you could see he was cold. When he was tired, you could see it in his shoulders even though his back was straight. That morning, Reed was neither cold nor tired. He was something else. I did not have a word for it yet. He stood 2 pillars down from me. Bearskin cap, red tunic, chin level, eyes forward, textbook. If you had walked past him, you would have seen nothing wrong, but I had stood beside men for years. You learn to read a person from the side, from the small things. The way his jaw was set too tight. The way his breath was going too slow, like a man holding himself underwater. The way his eyes, though they pointed straight ahead, were not really looking at anything in the crowd. They were looking at something the rest of us couldn't see. I did not know what it was, not then. I only knew that Private Reed looked like a man, standing on the edge of something. The bells rang the hour. 9 strokes, slow, rolling out over the courtyard and off the river. When the last one faded, the crowd went hush all at once, the way a crowd does when it feels something coming. The great doors opened. They came out in order the way they always do. First the household officers, then the ladies of the court, then Queen Sabine, tall and pale in dove gray, her chin up, her hands folded. She had a way of walking that made you feel she was doing you a favor by being seen. And beside her, one step behind, in a dark coat with the ribbon already pinned where the medal would hang, Lord Everett Vane. He was smiling. Of course he was. He looked out at the crowd, and the crowd made that soft, warm noise crowds make, and he took it in like sunlight. Then came the king. King Rowan, gray at the temples now, tired around the eyes, but a big man still, a solid man, and holding his hand, half hidden by his father's leg, small and stiff in a little formal coat that did not fit him quite right. Prince Aldous, 9 years old now, a year past the day he nearly drowned. I want to tell you about Aldous, because everything turns on him. He was a serious child, not shy exactly, serious. He had these gray eyes that were too old for his face, and he looked at people directly, which children usually do not, and adults find unsettling. He did not smile for the crowd the way Everett did. He looked at them like he was counting them. That morning, something was wrong with him. I saw it right away from my post. Aldous was walking beside his father, and his little face was set in a way I did not like. Not scared, not shy, closed, like a door someone had shut hard. And every few steps his eyes went not to the crowd, not to the cameras, but to Lord Everett, to the man in the dark coat with the ribbon. And each time they went there, that little jaw got tighter. The king seemed not to notice. The queen consort seemed not to notice. They had a ceremony to perform. They walked their son up onto the dais and put him in his little chair at the front, and the boy sat down and folded his hands in his lap exactly the way he had been taught, and looked out at nothing. The herald came forward. He had a scroll. He began to read the citation. I have heard 100 citations. They all sound the same. Whereas, on such a day in such a place, the following person did perform an act of such and such courage, and it is the pleasure of the crown to bestow, and so on and so on. The words roll over you. Most of the crowd stopped listening after the first sentence and just watched Everett stand there being handsome. But I was watching Reed. Because when the herald got to the part, when he said the words about the river, about the boy pulled from the black water, about Lord Everett's great and selfless courage, I saw Private Callum Reed's throat move. Just once. He swallowed, and a muscle went in his cheek, tight, and let go, and went tight again. And I thought, that boy knows something. I did not know what. I want to be honest with you. Standing there at my post, I did not have the whole picture. I only had a feeling, the cold, small feeling you get when two things that are supposed to fit together do not fit, and you cannot yet say why. Everett knows something too, I thought. No, Everett was easy. Everett was smiling, turning his good side to the cameras, resting one hand lightly on the hilt of the ceremonial sword at his belt. A man completely at peace with the story being told about him. That is the thing that stayed with me afterward, how at peace he looked. The herald finished. He rolled up his scroll. The king rose from his seat to make the presentation, because it is the king who pins the star always by tradition with his own hand. And the whole courtyard went still and warm and proud, waiting for it. The little girl in the yellow coat had gone quiet, even she felt it. King Rowan lifted the medal, the Star of Renholt, silver and old, catching what little light there was in that iron sky, and he turned toward Lord Everett, and Everett bowed his handsome head to receive it, and I remember thinking the whole thing was going to go exactly as everyone expected, the way these things always do. And then a small, clear voice said one word. No. Just that, one word, not loud, But in that silence it went out across the whole courtyard like a stone dropped in still water. Every head turned. Prince Aldous had stood up from his little chair. Let me stop the moment there, right where the boy stood up. I will come back to it. But you cannot understand what happened next unless I go back a little further and tell you the part of the story that nobody in that courtyard knew. Nobody except Private Callum Reed, and it turned out Prince Aldous. I only learned it fully afterward in pieces, some of it that same night and some of it in the weeks that came after. I have put it together the way you put together a broken thing, and I believe I have it right. Let me tell it to you plainly. The day the prince fell in the river, a year before, there was more than one person on that bank. The story everyone told had two people in it, the drowning boy and the hero who saved him. Clean, simple, but real days are not clean. Real days are crowded and confused and full of people you do not put in the story afterward because they do not fit the shape you want. There was a third person on the bank that day. His name was Daniel Reed, Callum's brother. Daniel Reed was a groom, a stablehand if you want the plain word. He looked after the horses of the royal party, and on the day of the accident he had come down to the river with them, holding the reins, keeping the animals calm, doing the invisible work that men like him always do. He was 23. He had a laugh, people said, that carried. He was going to be married in the spring. Here is what happened at the weir. I have it from two people who were there and did not want their names told, and from the boy himself later, which is a thing I will come to. The prince slipped and went into the water. It happened fast, the way these things do. 1 second a child on the grass, the next second nothing, just the black water going on the way it always does, not caring. And Lord Everett Vane was there. That part is true. He was there standing not 10 feet away. And he did not move. I want to be fair. I have thought about this a great deal. Maybe he froze. It happens to men. The body locks. The mind whites out. I have seen brave men freeze and cowards act, and I do not always understand it. Maybe Everett was not a coward. Maybe he was just a man who found in the 1 second that counted that his legs would not carry him. But he did not move. He stood on the bank and he stared at the water where the king's son had gone under, and he did nothing. Daniel Reed moved. The groom, the stable hand, the invisible man. He dropped the reins and he went into the weir, into the fast dark part that pulls at your legs, and he got his hands on the boy. Witnesses said he shoved the child up and toward the bank with everything he had, threw him almost up out of the pull toward where hands could reach him. The prince was saved. But the same water that let the boy go took Daniel. The current turned him and pulled him down under the weir, where the water folds back on itself, and it did not give him back. Not that day. They found him the next morning, a half-mile down in the reeds. He was buried without a medal, without a citation, without a single word said over him by the court. Because by the time the story reached the palace, the story had changed. I do not know exactly how. Maybe someone decided the kingdom needed a hero it could see, a hero with a name people already loved, and not a dead stable hand nobody had heard of. Maybe the queen consort could not bear for her son to have stood frozen on a bank while a servant did the brave thing. Maybe Everett himself, in his grief and his shame, said something in the confusion of that day that was not quite true, and then could not take it back, and then it was too late, and the thing had grown its own life. I do not know. I have decided I will never fully know, and that I do not need to. What I know is this. By the time it was written down, the man who went into the water was Lord Everett Vane, and the man who actually went into the water was in the ground. And Daniel Reed had a brother. Callum Reed had wanted to join the Guard since he was a boy. It was Daniel who had encouraged it, they say. When Daniel died, Callum went ahead and joined anyway, that same year, and I have wondered ever since whether he did it to honor his brother or whether he did it because he wanted to be inside the palace, close to the truth, standing near the people who had buried it. Maybe both, Men do things for more than one reason. So that is what I did not know, standing at my post that gray morning. That is what was behind Private Reed's tight jaw and his slow underwater breathing. He was standing at attention, in the uniform of the crown, 20 feet from a man about to be given the highest honor in the land for a thing that man had not done, for a thing that Reed's own brother had done, and died doing and been erased for. You try to stand still with that inside you. Now the child. You are wondering how Prince Aldous knew. Here is the thing about that boy that I told you and that turned out to matter more than anything. He was serious. He looked at people directly, he counted them, and he did not forget. Aldous had been 8 years old and half drowned, and everyone assumed he remembered nothing. That is what everyone wanted to believe, that the child had been too young, too frightened, too far under to have kept anything. A blank, convenient. But he had not been a blank, he had been a boy who saw. He remembered the hands. He told me this himself, much later in his own words, so I will give it to you as near to his words as I can. He said that when he went under, everything was cold and loud and then far away. And he said the last clear thing before the far away part was a face over him in the water, not Everett's face. A younger face, a stranger's face, a man he did not know, with water running off it, and this stranger's hands under him, pushing him up, and the man's mouth open like he was shouting something Aldous couldn't hear. And then hands on the bank pulling him, and when he came back to himself, coughing up the river, it was Everett kneeling over him, Everett's coat around him, Everett's voice. So the boy had two faces in his memory, the stranger in the water and Everett on the bank. And for a year, a small boy tried to fit those two faces together and could not, and did not have the words to ask, and everyone kept telling him the story with only Everett in it, and he knew, the way children know things without being able to argue them, that a piece was missing, that there had been another face, that nobody would say who it was. It ate at him, a serious child with a wrong story he cannot fix. It ate at him for a year. And then, this is the part that undoes me, a few weeks before the ceremony, Aldous found out who the other face was. It was Reed. I do not know exactly how they came to speak. The palace is a small world in its way. A prince wanders where he likes. A young guard is at his post. Perhaps the boy simply stopped, one quiet afternoon, in front of the new guardsman with the honest face, and looked at him too long, the way he looked at everyone. And perhaps something in the guardsman's grief was near enough the surface that day that when the child asked, because he would have asked, that boy directly, the way he did everything, the man could not lie to him. However it happened, Aldous learned that the stranger in the water had a name, and the name was Daniel Reed, and Daniel Reed was dead, and the man standing in front of him at attention was Daniel's brother. And the boy understood, finally, what had been missing. He understood that the man they were about to give a medal to had stood on the bank and watched, and that the man who had saved him was in the ground with nothing. A grown man, learning that, would have calculated, would have thought about the queen consort, about the court, about what it would cost, about who would be angry, about whether it was his place. A grown man would have found 19 good reasons to keep his mouth shut and let the ceremony go ahead and tell himself it was not his business. Aldous was 9. He did not calculate. He only knew that they were about to pin a star of courage onto a coward's chest, while the brother of the real hero stood 20 feet away in silence, and that this was wrong, so wrong that his whole small body could not hold it. So when his father lifted the medal, and the courtyard went warm and proud and still, and the whole kingdom leaned in to watch the lie become official, the boy stood up and said, "No, no." The word hung there. You have to understand what a strange thing that was. Children do not speak at ceremonies. It is not done. Aldous had been raised inside walls of what is done and what is not done, and to stand up and put one flat word into the middle of the most solemn moment of the year, it was as if a statue had cleared its throat. For a heartbeat nobody moved. The king stood there with the star of Renholt held out in his hand, the silver catching the gray light, frozen halfway to Everett's chest. The queen consort's face did a thing I will not forget, a small tightening, a flicker, gone almost before it came. Everett kept his handsome head bowed a second too long, as if by not looking up he could unmake what he had heard. And then the king, gently the way a father does, said, "Aldous, sit down, son." And the boy did not sit down. He stood there in his little coat that did not fit right, his hands no longer folded, his gray eyes going straight to Lord Everett, and he said, in that clear, high-carrying voice that children have, "He didn't save me." Nobody breathed. It wasn't him. Aldous lifted one small arm and pointed not at Everett but out past the dais toward the line of guards, toward the red tunics and the bearskins and the still faces, toward one still face in particular. It was his brother, it was Daniel. He went in the water, I saw his face. He pushed me up. The boy's voice cracked now, the way a child's does, going high and then breaking. And nobody says his name. Nobody ever says his name. "And you're going to give him a medal?" The arm swung back to Everett, and he just stood there. He just stood there and watched me drown. I have stood through a lot of silences at that post, none like that one. It was not empty silence. It was the loudest silence I have ever stood inside. You could feel 1,000 people all understanding the same thing at the same moment, all the pieces turning over at once. The reporters, the court, the tourists, the little girl in the yellow coat, who did not understand the words but understood the faces and pressed back against her mother's legs. And Everett. Everett looked up. And here is the thing that told everyone the boy was right. If it had been a lie, if the child had been confused or dreaming or making mischief, Everett would have laughed. A confident man laughs off a child's mistake. He smiles, he shakes his head, he says something warm and easy, and the moment passes and everyone feels foolish for having tensed. That is all it would have taken. One laugh. Everett did not laugh. Everett went white. He looked at the boy, and his handsome face came apart, just slightly, at the seams. I watched it happen, and every single person in that courtyard saw a guilty man's face and knew it for what it was. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked at his mother, the queen consort, quick, like a boy looking for help, and I understood in that one look exactly how the lie had been built and who had held it up. And the queen consort did not save him. I think that is the moment it was truly over. She could have said something. She was quick, she was clever, she could have found words. But she looked at her son standing there white and speechless and caught, and something in her face closed, and she said nothing at all. Maybe she had carried the lie too long herself. Maybe a mother reaches a place where she cannot lie for her child one more time, not in front of the whole world, not with the king's own son pointing and telling the truth. I do not know. But she looked away from Everett. She looked down at her folded hands, and her looking away was the last stone falling out of the wall. "Now read. I have been keeping him for you, because through all of this, from the boy's first no, I had not stopped watching Private Callum read. When the prince's arm swung out toward the line of guards, every eye in that courtyard followed it, and the arm pointed near enough to read that people began to understand who was meant. And the cameras turned. And 1,000 strangers looked all at once at a 19-year-old boy standing at attention in a red tunic, whose dead brother's name had just been spoken aloud, for the first time in front of the whole kingdom, by the child that brother had died to save. And Private Reed did not move. Understand what I am telling you. Everything in that boy must have been screaming. A year of grief. A year of watching another man wear his brother's courage like a coat. A year of standing silent inside these walls with the truth locked in his chest because he was a private and they were the court, and who would ever believe him? And now, in one impossible moment, a 9-year-old had picked up that truth and thrown it into the open air, and it was out. It was finally out, and the whole world had turned to look at him. He could have wept. No one would have blamed him. He could have broken his post and gone to the boy. He could have shouted his brother's name himself, added his own voice, let a year of it come pouring out. He did none of it. He stood at attention, chin level, eyes forward, back straight, boots together, exactly as he had been trained, exactly as his brother, they say, had once told him a guardsman should stand. The only thing that gave him away, and I saw it because I was close and I was looking for it, was that his eyes had filled. They did not fall. He did not let them fall. But they filled and they shone, and once, only once, his jaw worked, that same muscle in his cheek going tight and letting go, the way it had all morning. And he held. I have thought about that more than about anything else that happened that day. A man being given a medal and unable to stand under the weight of a child's honesty. And 20 feet away, a man given nothing and standing like stone under a weight I could not have carried myself. One of them was in the wrong uniform that day. One of them was wearing courage that was not his, and it was not the boy in the red tunic. The king had not moved either. He was still holding the star of Renholt in his hand, and now slowly he lowered it. He looked at the medal in his palm as if he did not know how it had got there. Then he looked at his son, at Aldous, still standing, still shaking now, a 9-year-old who had just done a braver thing than most men do in a lifetime and did not know it, only knew that he was frightened and that he had told the truth. And King Rowan crossed the dais and knelt down in front of his boy, right there, in front of everyone, a king on one knee, and put his big hand on the back of the child's head and pulled him in. He did not tell him to be quiet, he did not scold him, he held him. And over his son's head, King Rowan looked out past Everett, past the queen consort, out across the courtyard, and his eyes found the line of guards, and found the one still, shining-eyed young man standing at attention among them. And the king held his gaze for a long moment. And then, still on one knee with his son in his arms, in front of the whole court and the cameras and the world, King Rowan bowed his head. To a private, to a stablehand's brother, to Daniel Reed's blood. A king bowed his head first. That is when the sound started. Not applause. It was not the moment for applause. It was a low sound that went through the crowd, a kind of long exhale, a murmur with grief in it and something like shame in it and something like release. 1,000 people letting go of a lie at the same time. The little girl in the yellow coat had started to cry without knowing why. Children feel these things. Her mother picked her up. Around her, grown strangers were wiping their faces. And Everett Vane stood alone in the middle of the dais with no medal on his chest, and everyone's eyes sliding off him like water already, as if he were becoming less real by the second. Which, in a way, he was. The ceremony did not go on. How could it? There was no way to pick it back up, no page to turn to, no words in the old book of what is done for what to do when a child pulls the floor out of the whole thing. The officers moved. Quietly, quickly, the way we are trained to move when the shape of the day has broken, and it is our job to put people somewhere safe. The royal family was brought in off the dais. The queen consort went first, her chin still up but her face gone to stone, not looking at anyone. Everett went after her, and I will tell you, I almost pitied him, watching him walk back toward those great doors with nobody's eyes wanting to meet his. Almost. Then I thought of a stable hand in the reeds, and the pity went away. The king went last, and he carried his son. Aldous had gone quiet against his father's shoulder, the way children do after a great effort, when the thing is done and the body suddenly has nothing left. His gray eyes over his father's shoulder were still open, though, and as the king carried him toward the doors, those eyes found the line of guards one more time, found Reed. And the boy lifted one small hand, not a wave, just lifted it, held it up toward the young guardsman, palm open. A small child's way of saying something there are no words for. I see you. I told them. He was real. You are real. And Private Reed, who had held his post through all of it, who had not moved a muscle for the king himself. Private Reed brought his own hand up slowly and touched the brim of his bearskin and held it there. A salute to a 9-year-old prince. And the boy was carried inside, and the doors closed, and it was over. We stood our posts another 40 minutes. That is the part they never show you. The world had just cracked open. A man had been unmade. A dead groom had been given back his name in front of the whole kingdom, and we still had 40 minutes of our watch to stand. So we stood it. That is the job. The world ends and you stand your post until you are relieved. Reed stood every minute of it, straight, silent. His eyes had dried. Whatever was inside him, he had put it somewhere and shut the lid the way you have to, and he stood. But when the relief finally came, when we stepped down and turned and marched back through the arch out of sight of the crowd, into the gray courtyard behind where nobody watches, I saw the boy's shoulders go. All at once, like a rope cut. He got about 10 steps into that empty yard, and then he stopped and put one hand flat against the cold stone wall and bent over it, and his whole back shook. I broke formation. I am not ashamed of it. Some things are more than the drill. I went and stood next to him. I did not say much. What is there to say? I put my hand on the back of his neck the way you do, and I let him break where nobody could see, because a man is owed at least that, to break in private after he is held in public. And after a while he got his breath back and he straightened up, and he wiped his face with the back of his hand and he looked at me. And he said, I remember it exactly, he said. They said his name. That was all. They said his name. A year of silence. A year of watching the world honor the wrong man. And what broke him in the end was not the injustice. It was the ending of it. It was hearing his brother's name said out loud by the boy Daniel died for in front of everyone at last. I told him yes. They said his name, and they would never be able to unsay it now. It was out in the world, in the cameras, in 1,000 people's memories, in the little girl in the yellow coat who would grow up telling this story. It was carved now. It could not be buried again. He nodded. He could not talk anymore, but he nodded. You want to know how it ended for the others? I will tell you what I know. Lord Everett Vane left Renholt within the month, quietly. No announcement. One day his rooms in the palace were simply empty. There was no trial. The truth of that day was never the kind of thing that fits in a courtroom. Freezing on a bank is not a crime, and the lie had too many hands on it to pin on one man cleanly. But he was finished all the same. You cannot go on being loved by a kingdom that has watched your face come apart in front of a child. He went abroad. I never heard that he came back. The queen consort stayed. She's still the queen consort, but something changed in her after that day, people say, a quietness, a carefulness. She and the king are correct with one another now, and no more than correct. Whatever she chose that autumn when she looked away from her drowning son on the bank and let a story be told, and again on the dais when she looked away from him a second time, she has to carry it. I do not envy her. Some medals are heavier for not being worn. The king ordered a stone. That was the thing he did, and I have always thought it was the right thing, the only thing that mattered. Down by the weir where the water runs fast and dark, there is a stone now. It is not large. It is gray, like everything in Renholt. And it has one name on it and a few words, and the words say that on that spot a man named Daniel Reed went into the river to bring back the son of the king, and did not come back himself, and that the kingdom remembers. They say Prince Aldous chose the words. I believe it. They are plain words the way that boy is plain. No flourishes, just the truth set down where the water can see it. And Callum Reed. He is still in the guard. He is not a boy anymore. This was years ago now, though I have told it to you as if it were yesterday, because to me it is always yesterday. He made corporal, then sergeant. He is one of the steadiest men on the wall now, one of the ones the young ones watch to learn how it is done. He does not talk about that day. I have never once heard him bring it up. But every year on the autumn morning it happened, he asks for that post, the north end of the ceremonial line, and he stands it. And when his watch is done, he walks down to the weir, alone, and he stands a while by the gray stone with his brother's name on it. And then he comes back and says nothing to anybody. I asked him once, years later, when we were old friends and I thought I had the right, how he did it. How he stood there that morning and held his post while the whole world turned to look at him, and everything in him must have wanted to break. how a 19-year-old boy did that. He thought about it for a long time. Then he said the truest thing anyone has ever said to me about this uniform. He said, my brother went into the water because it was his job to keep the boy safe, and nobody was watching, and he did it anyway. Standing still while everybody watched, that was easy next to that. I just wanted to be worth the same name he was. I have worn this uniform for a great many years now. I have stood through rain and heat and screaming and silence. And of all of it, the thing I am proudest to have seen is a boy in a red tunic, standing at attention with his eyes full and never letting them fall, while a 9-year-old prince said the one true word that a whole kingdom had been too grand and too frightened to say. One word. No. Sometimes it is the smallest voice in the courtyard that is the only one telling the truth. And sometimes the bravest man on the wall is the one you never noticed, the one standing perfectly still, holding a grief you cannot see, waiting, without hope and without complaint, for the day the world finally says his brother's name. They said it. I was there, I heard them say it.